Kuhn says things are already uneven, and the tariffs just make it worse.
We're already at a disadvantage, and then we throw the tariffs on top, then that's just not a good marketplace to be in.
That's more than half of the $24 billion worth of all agricultural goods America exported to China in 2024.
And part of this is, too, we're not, world production leaders anymore in soybeans, so we've kind of taken second or third fiddle on the soybean production side.
What if I told you that millions of pounds of U.S. grain are rotting away in silos, not because of bad weather or poor harvests, but because of decisions made in Washington? Stick around. This story gets even crazier.
And more tariffs could mean more trouble for Iowa farmers. The latest rates with China means that some of the state's biggest ag exports could be staying at home and could be costing farmers a lot of money.
A response to President Trump's 145% rate on Chinese goods. The American Soybean Association's president says it's not good news for America's soybean farmers.
We are dependent on trade. Right at 50% of the soybeans produced in the United States are exported.
And a lot of those soybeans come from Iowa. China announced Friday a tariff of 125% on all U.S. imports.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Imagine losing your biggest customer overnight and then watching them shake hands with your rival down the street. That's exactly what happened to U.S. farmers when China, once their #1 buyer of soybeans, pulled the plug. For years, American farmers churned out soybeans by the millions of tons to feed China's ever-growing demand.
China takes more of our soybeans than all other foreign customers combined. So they're a major part of our market.
No matter what size you are, these are real impactful tariffs. They were our #1 buyer for quite a long time.
China imported almost $13 billion worth of soybeans from the U.S. last year. Trent Kuhn is a lifelong farmer from Walker, and he's worried about what the future holds too.
No matter what size you are. So we need China to come to the table, and that's for the politicians to figure out, of course. But
it was a relationship so steady that some farmers joked their tractors ran on soy exports to Beijing. But when the U.S.-China trade war kicked off, that golden partnership collapsed faster than a crop in a drought. Things escalated quickly. In response to U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, China slapped a jaw-dropping 25% tariff on American soybeans. If that wasn't harsh enough, they tacked on an extra 100%, making it painfully clear that U.S. exports had been flat-out priced out of the market. Imagine a diner suddenly banning its favorite local flour supplier right before the breakfast rush.
He says the goal is to still make some profit, but even in uncertain times, Kuhn is staying optimistic.
For first and foremost, everybody's desire to make money and make a profit, but then after that, it probably falls to break-even point because there again, this price could go back up or it could go down. We have no idea at this point.
Faven Zodu, Iowa's News Now.
We're getting closer and closer to planting season, but farmers say that they're so hopeful that things will get resolved.
And then after that, I think if you do want to make some sales, you just have to pick a number and hope that number's gonna be the right number for you.
Then importing bags from overseas because they're slightly cheaper after taxes. That's what it was like for U.S. farmers watching ships full of soybeans dock in Brazil instead of China. So what happens when the world's biggest buyer of soybeans stops buying from you? The ripple effects were devastating. Mountains of unsold grain began stacking up in silos across the Midwest. Soybean prices nosedived, hitting their lowest levels in over a decade. For some farmers, every passing day felt like watching the clock tick down on a losing gamble. One farmer called it death by storage fees, as keeping unsold crops became yet another cost in a system completely out of their control.
China begins imposing tariffs on U.S. farm products today. The policies include a 15% tariff on chicken, wheat, and corn. It's America's #1 agricultural export, adding $3.12 billion to the U.S. economy in 2023, as well as 10% on products like soybeans, pork, beef, and fruit. China is the #1 importer of U.S. soybean products, and soy exports are a major part of the U.S. economy.
The American Soybean Association didn't mince words during the chaos, pointing out that these tariffs were tearing apart trade relationships that had taken decades to build. And while Washington blustered about holding firm, China quietly moved on. Instead of waiting on a trade deal, they doubled down in places like Brazil and Argentina, pouring billions into new railroads and port systems. It wasn't just a one-time shopping spree, it was the start of a whole new supply chain. For American farmers, the message was clear. China didn't need them anymore, and South America was happy to take their place. But how did Washington react? Let's just say the solution didn't exactly inspire confidence. What's worse than losing your livelihood? Someone tossing a check at you with a pat on the back and saying, "Good luck." That's essentially what happened when the U.S. government rolled out a $20 billion bailout program for farmers in the wake of the trade war. On paper, it was supposed to help them stay afloat. In reality, it felt like trying to stop a sinking ship with duct tape, and flimsy duct tape at that. Farmers weren't asking for a handout, they wanted their markets back. They needed the stability that generations had come to rely on, but instead, they got checks that barely covered their losses. Many farmers found themselves selling off equipment and even parts of their land just to stay in business. Imagine spending decades building a family legacy, only to turn around and sell your tractor because you suddenly couldn't pay the bills. And it wasn't just individual farms feeling the pain. Entire communities began crumbling under the pressure. County fairs were canceled, co-ops shut their doors, and local schools watched their enrollments shrink as families moved away. One farmer put it bluntly, saying, "I was proud to tell my son this land would be his. Now what am I handing him? Debt." That despair hit more than their wallets. It struck at their identity. For many, farming wasn't just a job, it was who they were. The bailout might have kept the lights on a little longer, but it didn't address the larger issue, the trust they'd lost in the system. Trade relationships with countries like China had been meticulously built over decades. Then, with a few tariff tantrums, they were gone. And the emotional toll, that was brutal too. Suicide rates in farming communities climbed, and calls to rural mental health hotlines surged. Families that once saw farming as a proud tradition now wondered if it was worth the stress and uncertainty. If this is what a bailout looks like, what does the future of farming in America hold? The U.S. farm crisis is more than an economic disaster. It's a glaring example of how short-sighted policies can uproot entire industries. The trade war, meant to punish China, punished America's farmers instead, robbing them of vital markets. And the bailout was like throwing loose change at a sinking ship. It raises a big question. How does a country rich in land and resources fail to protect the people who feed it? Fixing this isn't about band-aids. It's about trust, smarter policies, and relearning how to value agriculture. If farming crumbles, who's left to fight a global food crisis? Something's gotta change.